Every age has its explorers. Men who stare at blank spaces on maps and believe the emptiness is an invitation. Mountains unclimbed, seas unnamed. Lines that end not because the world does, but because knowledge does. File 011 begins with one such man. His name was Edmund Hale, at least that is the name preserved in fragmented expedition records. A cartographer by training, an explorer by obsession. In the late 19th century, Hawley became fixated on a rumor that circulated quietly among sailors, whalers, and failed adventurers. A place beyond maps, not unknown land, but unrecordable land. They called it many things, the white margin. The last line, most simply, the edge of the world. Official institutions dismissed the idea. By then, the world was believed to be fully charted, coastlines measured, longitudes fixed. Satellites were not needed. No, there was nothing left. But Hawley disagreed. He believed maps didn't end because land ended. They ended because certainty failed. In 1897, Hawley funded a private expedition using his inheritance. No flag, no government backing, no public announcements. Only 6 men, a reinforced vessel, and navigation equipment modified beyond standard use. His journals, recovered later in fragments, show a mind growing increasingly detached from conventional geography. Maps are agreements, he wrote, and I intend to travel where agreement breaks down. The expedition departed quietly from a northern port. Initial progress was routine, ice, fog, long days of nothing. Hale's logs remained precise coordinates, wind direction, celestial readings. Then the entries changed. Latitude and longitude began repeating. Compass headings contradicted star positions. Time measurements drifted. Hale noted this calmly at first. Instruments disagree, he wrote, but not randomly. By the 3rd week, the crew began reporting visual anomalies. The horizon appeared closer than it should be. The sea flattened unnaturally, like a painted surface. Sound behaved strangely, voices carrying too far, then not at all. One sailor requested to turn back. Hale refused. If the world has an edge, he wrote, it will not announce itself. The last confirmed location of the expedition is unremarkable. No storms, no ice fields, no distress signal. Just a final, clean coordinate. And then nothing. No wreckage. No bodies. No survivors. Search efforts were brief and half-hearted. The official conclusion cited navigational failure and environmental hazards. But one detail quietly disturbed those who reviewed Hale's recovered journals. The final entry did not describe danger. It described arrival. The horizon has stopped retreating, Hawley wrote. There is nowhere further for distance to go. The sentence ends there. No fear, no triumph, just an observation. As if Edmund Hawley had not reached the end of the world by accident, but exactly as intended. The first rescue vessel sent after Edmund Hale's disappearance reported nothing unusual. That, in itself, was unusual. The sea was calm, too calm. Veteran sailors described the water as wrong, not dangerous, not violent, just unnervingly still. Waves existed, but they didn't travel. They rose and fell in place, as if motion itself had been suspended. The rescue captain logged the phenomenon cautiously. Sea state inconsistent with wind conditions. Feels staged. Navigation instruments behaved no better than Hale's had. Compasses drifted without settling. Sextant readings contradicted one another by several degrees. One officer swore the sun appeared to hesitate before setting, lingering on the horizon longer than physics allowed. They found nothing of the expedition, no broken mast, no floating debris, no oil slick. It was as if Hale's vessel had never existed. When the rescue crew attempted to mark the search area, their coordinates refused to remain consistent. Each time they logged a position and returned to it, the readings shifted slightly, as if the sea itself resisted being pinned down. After 4 days, the search was quietly abandoned. Officially, the explanation was cost and weather. Unofficially, the crew did not want to go back. One sailor later told a reporter off the record, "It felt like if we stayed too long, we'd forget why we came." Back on land, Hale's journals were examined more closely. Scholars noticed a gradual but deliberate change in language. Early entries referenced distance and direction. Later entries replaced them with words like threshold, boundary, and limit. He had stopped navigating through space. He was navigating toward something. One particularly disturbing passage stood out. The sea no longer reflects the sky. It reflects expectation. What did that mean? Crew testimony collected before memories faded added fragments. They described moments when the horizon appeared solid, like a pale wall, when clouds aligned into unnatural straight lines, when the ship's wake disappeared instantly, as if the water refused to remember being disturbed. Time, too, became unreliable. Watches disagreed by hours. Sleep cycles broke down. A sailor claimed he worked an entire shift without feeling fatigue, only to collapse once he stepped below deck. Halley did not log these complaints as dangers. He logged them as confirmation. "We are approaching the margin," he wrote, "where persistence gives way to permission." That line terrified later reviewers. Permission from whom? From what? The prevailing theory among a small group of geographers was radical. Hall had encountered not a physical boundary, but a conceptual one, a region where the rules that allowed space to behave as space began to thin. Not an edge you fall off, but an edge where the idea of elsewhere stops making sense. This would explain the lack of wreckage. If the ship crossed such a boundary, there would be nothing left behind to find. No debris, no echoes, no trace, just absence. By the time these theories surfaced, it was already too late. Funding for further research vanished. Hale's name slipped into obscurity. His expedition was categorized as another tragic loss to the sea. But among those who studied the case closely, one conclusion remained unavoidable. Edmund Halley did not disappear because the world was dangerous. He disappeared because he reached a place where the world no longer needed to continue. Nearly 20 years after Edmund Halley vanished, a map surfaced that should not have been possible. It appeared in a private auction in 1916, mislabeled as an unfinished Arctic survey. Most bidders ignored it. The paper was yellowed. The ink faded. No legend, no scale. But one scholar recognized the handwriting. It was Hale's. The map did not depict land in any conventional sense. Coastlines faded into blankness without closure. Grid lines bent subtly near the margins. Compass roses were present, but none pointed north. At the bottom corner, in Hale's unmistakable script, were 4 words: "Here distance refuses." The auction house had no record of how the map entered their collection. No previous owner, no shipping manifest. It simply appeared in the inventory. When researchers examined the paper, they made an impossible discovery. The map's materials, ink composition, paper fibers, matched those from Hale's final journals, which meant it was created during the expedition, after his disappearance. Even stranger, the map showed a boundary that no known geography could explain. Not a coastline, not an ice shelf. A line beyond which no markings existed, not even blank space. Not unknown, absent. Attempts to overlay the map onto real-world coordinates failed. The closer analysts aligned known landmarks, the more the map distorted, stretching, compressing, resisting alignment like a living thing. One cartographer described the experience. "It's not that the map is wrong, it's that our reference frame is." The map behaved oddly around instruments. Compasses near it drifted. Rulers measured inconsistent lengths along the same line. Photographs of the map blurred at the edges no matter the focus, as if the boundary Halley had drawn did not want to be captured. Most unsettling was a small annotation near the blank margin. Beyond this, return is undefined, scholars debated endlessly. Was the map a hoax, a metaphor, a psychological artifact? Then a mathematician noticed something subtle. The grid lines did not bend randomly. They followed a progression similar to models used to describe space-time curvature decades before such concepts were formally proposed. Halley had drawn what looked like a limit of extension, a point where adding more distance stopped producing new location. An edge not of matter, but of continuity. If true, the implications were staggering. It would mean the world is not infinite in every direction, not because of physical borders, but because perception, memory, and persistence require structure to exist. And beyond a certain point, they fail. The map was quickly bought by a private collector and vanished again. No public institution ever acknowledged its existence, but copies circulated quietly among a handful of researchers, and each of them reported the same disturbing sensation when studying it too long, a feeling of pressure, of standing too close to something final, as if the map was not just a record of where Halley went, but an invitation, a warning, or a proof that Edmund Halley did not vanish at sea. He crossed a line that maps were never meant to draw. While Edmund Hale's map haunted scholars, another set of documents quietly surfaced. Crew testimonies recorded before the expedition vanished entirely from public memory. These statements were never released. They were gathered during the first inquiry, sealed, and then forgotten in an archive mislabeled Maritime Personnel, incomplete. What they contained was not panic. It was erosion. The crew did not describe storms or monsters. They described forgetting. One sailor reported difficulty recalling his hometown. Another struggled to remember why he had joined the expedition at all. A third admitted that when he tried to picture his family, the faces came without names. At first, Hall treated these symptoms clinically. Cognitive slippage observed, he wrote, correlates with proximity to boundary. The men did not argue. They trusted him. But as days passed, the forgetting spread. Language began to thin. Sailors substituted gestures for words. Names were shortened, then abandoned. Personal histories collapsed into vague impressions: warmth, work, water. One man stopped speaking entirely not out of fear, but because he claimed there was nothing left to say that belonged to him. Timekeeping became impossible. Watches lost meaning. The sun's position no longer anchored the day. Sleep came without rest. Waking brought no clarity. A sailor wrote in shaky script, If I forget where I was from, does the place still exist? Holly did not comfort him. Instead, Holly wrote something chilling. The world may require memory to remain extended. This was the moment when the expedition stopped being exploration and became experiment. Holly began documenting what disappeared first. Memories faded before physical sensation, names before skills, identity before instinct. Even as the men forgot who they were, they still worked the ship. They still responded to danger. They still followed Holly, as if function outlasted self. One testimony ended mid-page. The last legible line reads, "I think the edge is not a place. It is where the world stops asking us to remember it." Hale's own writing grew steadier as the cruise deteriorated. His hand remained precise, his tone calm. He was not forgetting. Or worse, he was choosing what to let go. Near the end, one sailor confronted Hull, demanding they turn back. The exchange was recorded by another crew member who later could not remember writing it. Hale's response was brief. "We are already where turning back would require more memory than we have." That may explain why no distress signal was ever sent. Not because the men were prevented, but because the concept of return no longer meant anything. By the final days, the crew no longer referred to land or home. They referred only to continuation. And Hale's last recorded command to them was not about survival. It was about acceptance. "Hold fast," he wrote. "We are nearly finished being elsewhere." By the time the expedition reached what Edmund Halley called the margin, navigation had become ceremonial. The compass still spun, the stars still appeared, but neither pointed anywhere. Crew logs from the final phase describe an unnerving consistency. No matter which direction the ship turned, the horizon remained unchanged. North did not feel different from south. Forward and backward produced the same view, flat, pale, endless. One sailor wrote, "We move, but the world does not answer." Halley, however, believed this was the clearest sign yet that they were close. "Direction assumes elsewhere," he noted. "We are approaching where elsewhere no longer applies." The sea no longer resisted the hull. Waves parted without sound. The ship's wake vanished instantly, leaving no evidence of passage. It was as if the water refused to acknowledge disturbance. Distance collapsed. A lookout reported seeing the bow and stern of the ship at the same time, an impossible perspective. Another claimed the horizon was both far away and immediately reachable, like a thought rather than a place. The crew stopped asking where they were going. They began asking how much longer they would still be moving. Time became the final anchor, and it was failing too. Hale's chronometer showed steady progression. Crew watches lagged, raced, or stopped entirely. Sleep cycles dissolved. Meals were taken when hunger appeared, not by schedule. One log entry reads, "I do not know if today follows yesterday, but it follows something." Even Halley admitted a change. Duration persists. Sequence does not. This distinction mattered to him. Because if sequence failed but duration remained, then the expedition had not ended. It had flattened. Forward motion became repetition. Each moment resembled the last closely enough that memory could no longer separate them. Without sequence, the crew could not tell if they were approaching the edge or had already crossed it. One sailor finally asked the question none of them had spoken aloud. "What if we already went past it?" Hale considered this, then wrote, "Then the edge is not a crossing. It is a condition." Shortly after, the ship's bell rang without being touched. Once, then never again. No mechanical cause was found. The men did not panic. Panic requires contrast, before and after. They no longer possessed either. The final crew log does not describe catastrophe. It describes stillness. "We are not stopped," it reads. There is simply nothing left to be moving relative to. Hale's final navigational note was precise, almost tender. The world does not end here. It simply stops continuing. After that, no more crew records exist. Only Hale's last journal page, written in a hand as steady as ever, remains. It contains no coordinates, just a sentence written twice, as if to be certain. I can see the edge now. And it is not a line. Edmund Hale's final journal does not end with panic. That is what unsettles historians the most. There is no struggle, no sudden disaster, no final cry for help. Instead, the writing grows quieter, almost relieved. According to the last intact pages, the expedition did not reach the edge in a dramatic sense. There was no cliff, no abyss, no roaring sea. What they encountered was something far more difficult to explain: release. Hale describes the world behaving as if it were tired. The sky lost depth, flattening into a uniform pale tone that did not change with time. Clouds stopped drifting. They did not dissolve or move, they simply remained like unfinished thoughts. The sea followed. It no longer reflected light correctly. Sunlight spread across it evenly, without glare or shadow. The water appeared solid at a distance, yet yielded when touched. One passage stands out. The world is no longer insisting on detail. Sound faded, next, not suddenly, but selectively. The creak of the ship disappeared first, then the wind. Then voices seemed to arrive without echo, as if the air itself had grown indifferent to carrying them. The crew stopped speaking altogether, not because they couldn't, but because speech no longer seemed necessary. Hale recorded this without fear. Meaning remains, even as expression thins. Then came the final phenomenon. The horizon opened. Not split, not broke. It simply ceased to behave as a boundary. Hale wrote that distance ahead of the ship no longer felt external. The concept of a head softened, as if the world were gently folding inward rather than extending outward. "We are not approaching something," he noted. "We are being unheld." This may explain why no wreckage was ever found. If the expedition passed into a region where persistence itself relaxed, where objects were no longer required to maintain separation, then nothing would remain behind to recover. No broken ship, no bodies, no debris, only discontinuation. The final confirmed entry in Hale's journal is brief. It contains no scientific language, no speculation, just acceptance. The edge is not a wall. It is the place where the world stops asking us to stay. After that page, the ink changes. The handwriting remains Hale's, but the pressure lightens dramatically, as if the pen were barely touching paper. One last sentence appears unfinished. "I think the world is," and then nothing. No torn page, no smear, just an incomplete thought, as if even conclusion had been gently withdrawn. Scholars who reviewed the journal noticed one final detail. The paper shows no water damage, no salt stains, no signs of exposure to the elements. It was preserved perfectly, which suggests the journal was not lost at sea, but set down, left behind at the very last place where behind still meant something. If Edmund Halley reached the edge of the world, he did not fall. He stepped into a place where the world no longer needed to continue and was allowed to stop. Years after Edmund Hale vanished, the world tried to forget him. Maps were redrawn, shipping routes updated, his name reduced to a footnote in maritime disaster lists. Another lost explorer claimed by the sea. But the edge, it seemed, did not keep everything. Fragments drifted back. The first was a ship's bell, found floating hundreds of miles from any known wreckage. It showed no corrosion, no barnacles, no marks of long exposure. When rung, it produced no sound, only a pressure change, like air shifting in a sealed room. Sailors refused to keep it aboard. Then came reports of flat, seized patches of ocean where waves stopped behaving normally. Ships passing through experienced brief disorientation. Compasses wavered. Voices sounded distant even when spoken close. These areas were temporary. They faded within hours. But they shared one thing: location. Each occurrence aligned loosely with the last known coordinate of Hale's expedition. More unsettling were the dreams. Coastal communities began reporting a recurring vision among unrelated people. A pale horizon, a silent ship, and a man standing calmly at the bow, writing. The man never turned around. Psychologists dismissed the dreams as shared myth, the result of rumors and old maritime legends resurfacing. Except for one detail. The dreams always ended the same way, with the sensation of being gently released, as if something had stopped holding the dreamer in place. No fear, no fall, just letting go. In 1924, a lighthouse keeper recorded an incident in his log. For exactly 6 minutes, the beam of his light did not travel outward. It ended abruptly in midair, as if striking an invisible surface. He wrote, "It was not darkness. It was nothing further." When the beam returned to normal, the sea showed no disturbance. Authorities never investigated. Then, in 1938, a shipping company quietly updated its navigation manuals. A previously blank section of ocean was marked with an internal note: avoid prolonged station keeping. No explanation, no reason, just caution. Those who knew the history understood. The edge was not fixed, it drifted. Not geographically, but conceptually, appearing wherever the world grew thin. Wherever distance, direction, and persistence were asked to do more than they could. Edmund Hale had not discovered a place. He had discovered a condition, and conditions can recur. That is why no official monument exists for him, why his maps remain locked away, why the phrase edge of the world never appears in formal geography. Because acknowledging it would mean admitting that the world is not infinite in its ability to continue, that sometimes it simply lets go. And when it does, those who reach that moment do not die. They stop being required. History remembers endings poorly. We expect explosions, wreckage, last messages filled with fear. But Edmund Hale's story refuses that comfort. There was no dramatic finale, only absence, neatly folded into the world as if it had always been meant to fit there. Officially, the expedition was declared lost in 1903. The report was brief, presumed sunk due to unknown conditions. No blame, no lessons learned. The sea, as always, took responsibility. Unofficially, Hale's name became something else. A warning passed quietly between navigators. A silence in certain coordinates. A reason some sailors refused to linger when the water grew too still. The map Halley drew was never displayed publicly. The journal was archived under restricted access. His theories were dismissed as philosophical distractions, not science. Not because they were wrong, but because they implied something unbearable, that the world is not obligated to remain whole, that distance, time, and identity are not permanent features but agreements, and agreements can end. The edge Halley encountered was not a place where humans were forbidden. It was a place where continuation was optional. Those who vanished there were not punished. They were not consumed. They were simply released from the requirement to persist. That is why no remains were found, because remains assumed something has stopped. Hale's expedition did not stop. It concluded. In rare academic circles, Hale's case is referenced under a term that never appears in textbooks: terminal continuity loss, a theoretical condition in which systems cease not through destruction, but through withdrawal of necessity. The system no longer needs to go on, and so it doesn't. If this sounds impossible, consider how much of reality relies on expectation. The sun will rise, space will extend, memory will hold, time will move forward. Hal reached the moment where expectation ran out, and the world gently did not argue. Even now, the ocean occasionally reminds us. A stretch of water too calm, a compass that hesitates, a moment where forward feels identical to staying still. Most people pass through without noticing, but a few feel it, and when they do, something ancient stirs, not fear, but recognition, as if the world is whispering, "You may stop here if you wish." Edmund Halley did. And that is why his story endures not as a tragedy, but as a question history refuses to ask aloud. If the world no longer requires you to continue, would you?